Welcome back to False Dichotomies. I'm Cy Castells.
I'm Daria Quinn, and today we are discussing Chrono Trigger. 1995 Squaresoft role-playing game originally released for the Super Nintendo. You played the Steam version.
Yeah, the Steam version for PC, which apparently has terrible controls, which I struggled with. But I did manage to get through it in spite of that.
I, of course, am going off the memories of playing the Super Nintendo version. I discovered the game in high school. A friend of mine let me borrow it. He's like, "You're going to really like this."
My experience with JRPGs has been, before this, in 2011 or thereabouts, I attempted to play Eternal Sonata. Mm. And I loved the aesthetic, but I could not get through the game because the gameplay was just too non-intuitive for me. And honestly, Chrono Trigger's gameplay was non-intuitive for me for very similar reasons, but I was much more determined to get through it because it was a recommendation from you.
Chrono Trigger is very special.
Oh yeah. I know.
As far as JRPGs go. And what was the first thing I told you about this game?
It was the first time you ever felt like you had failed a character, and that had really emotionally affected you to the point where you played the whole game again just to rectify that.
And that's
fans probably know what we're talking about here.
We will get to it, but that's the thing that resonated with me with this game was it made me care about the characters and the story to the point where when I wasn't able to do something for one of them, it shook me. I mean, I still hear that digitized scream sometimes.
Oh yeah. The fade to black, and then a beat later, there's it like, even when I was like rewatching my recording of gameplay, I jumped when that happened. And by the way, I did record myself playing it, and our plan is when we get a Patreon set up so that people can donate to us on a regular basis, just as a treat for people who do, those videos will be made available to you. Cool. So you can watch me struggle to figure out what button is what, and actually screaming when the jump scares happen, and there are jump scares, and commentating on the problematic gender aspects of which there are a few. They aren't like overwhelming, but there are a few glaring gender-related problems.
And those gender-related problems are basically genre-wide, and some of them are rooted in Japanese culture.
I actually have like a list on my notes of tropes that I did not like about Chrono Trigger, and every single one of them are things that are stock tropes of the fantasy genre or of science fiction or like... Right. The genres that Chrono Trigger occupies. So I forgive that because sometimes when because it's like such a well-written and expansively detailed story, you can't fully realize every detail. So sometimes you just fall back on convention, and that's just what happens. I forgive you, Chrono Trigger, for having some sexism.
So Chrono Trigger was essentially put together with the guy that helped create the Final Fantasy series, Hironobu Sakaguchi.
We are Americans, and we cannot pronounce Japanese.
If I'm saying these names wrong, please be nice when you try to help me. Yuji Horii was the game designer and creator of Dragon Quest, and Akira Toriyama, who was the creator of the Dragon Ball series. So you have two people who are very Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. There are two guys that are very familiar with the RPG format. They basically helped make Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest, and of course Akira Toriyama. I think everybody knows about Dragon Ball Z.
I know about it. I don't know whether I can actually describe it beyond they actually have cards in the anime as well as in real life. So it's like an extra layer of commercialization.
Dragon Ball Z, the best way for me as a person that has never really gotten into it to describe it is a fight scene that cuts off in the middle, and you have to watch the next episode to finish it.
That sounds enraging.
Yeah, the episodes start with the end of a fight. There's some stuff in between, and the next episode, and then you have the beginning of another fight, and it cuts off, and you gotta wait till the next episode. And that is the entire series.
Actually, that makes it really ahead of its time, because, like, isn't that how most modern serial dramas are formatted these days, where it's like every episode is a cliffhanger?
Yeah. But, and I'm overgeneralizing, and I know that there will probably be the Dragon Ball fan that will not appreciate it. And it's all about yelling and roar and...
Isn't that where the over 9,000 meme came from?
That's
yeah.
where it came from.
That's the other thing I know about Dragon Ball is over 9,000.
But at the same time, it has cultivated a fan base that loves the characters and loves the lore. So, I mean, my gross overgeneralization aside, there's a fan base that has connected to Dragon Ball, that loves Dragon Ball, and I can see why there are...
I think that's, like, something about, like, Japanese pop culture in general is very, very good at inspiring fervent, loyal enthusiasm in its fans. That I was actually thinking about this on the drive here. I wonder if this has something to do with how Japanese culture views art in general. If you watched The History of Japan by Bill Wirtz, you know that there was a whole period of Japanese history where the royals were so obsessed with art that they couldn't royal anymore, and that's when the shogun had to come in and take over the government. And like art and music and literature have always been huge parts of Japanese culture. So it makes perfect sense that when they got into electronic media and mass media, even the ones that are extremely commercial and like basically made for marketing toys, they really take the story seriously, and they make it meaningful. So yeah, I think that's something that the rest of the world can stand to emulate, is taking art seriously in everywhere it shows up.
Because going back to my gross overgeneralization of the Dragon Ball series, it works for Dragon Ball because they care about the characters in the story. Whereas the American knockoffs that follow a similar formula don't care about the story so much. It's sort of like the difference between Power Rangers and Super Sentai. Super Sentai is the Japanese series that the footage is taken and then repurposed into Power Rangers for the worldwide market, mostly North America, but it goes there. I've heard similar stories about like the American versions of kaiju movies,
especially Godzilla, because the original Godzilla was much more of an intellectual story with symbolism and meanings and development. And then when Americans got a hold of it, they turned it into this very simple story about big monster smash city. So,
and the thing about the kaiju movies, especially the Godzilla movies, they did this on like Ed Wood budgets. Yeah. With like rubber suits and models, and in the same way with the Super Sentai series, pretty much most of Japanese tokusatsu is made on it has been made on low budgets, and until the last 15 years or so has been very dependent on cheap practical effects. Once computer generated graphics got really cheap to do, now Sentai might as well just be computer animated because of everything. But we're getting
and
off
like
the point.
I want to point out, like, I am not a weeb. I don't fetishize Japanese culture. I have enjoyed a few animes in my life, but I am not an anime fanatic. I have read part of one manga. I have seen Princess Mononoke, and beyond that, I am not especially, like, knowledgeable or enthusiastic about Japanese culture. So when I say that like Japanese art is especially evocative of emotional connection, that's coming from like a relatively objective observer, not someone who has caught the bug and will never recover from it, you know?
My consumption of Japanese media is primarily Super Sentai, because of its connection to Power Rangers, and I am a avid Power Rangers fan. So,
I see.
So that's why I know a lot about tokusatsu, Japanese special effects shows. So kaiju, my brother is really into the Godzilla series, so I'm exposed to a lot of the kaiju fandom, and of course Japanese pro wrestling.
Of course, absolutely.
Which is in itself its own culture. Something to get into in a future episode. But anyway, we were talking about Chrono Trigger.
Yeah. And like I actually wanted to mention, like I have played through this game once. And it took me less than a month. Or approximately 30 to 40 hours. I haven't counted exactly how many.
Okay. So you got stuck a few times.
Oh, yeah. Well, plus I spent a good several hours on a side quest that apparently didn't exist in the original version.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. And it was, and in retrospect, this was the Lost Sanctum side quest, for those of you who've played. And I needed to do that quest because I needed the gear and I needed the XP in order to like beat the boss, because I'd already failed to beat the boss at that point.
Right.
But it doesn't jive much with the rest of the game, and when I found out that it was added in a later version, I understood that completely, because it is a style of side quest that involves a lot of like going back and forth and like talking to this guy and talking to that guy and going to fetch this item and going to fetch that item, and like this extremely complicated set of errands that one of the developers said that he had wanted to explicitly avoid in this game is these like intricate like
fetch quests.
Yeah, fetch quests. Although like even getting through that side quest kind of like added to my appreciation of the themes, because as awkwardly as it fit into the gameplay, it did fit very well with the themes established in the story. So I am glad that I spent all those hours, not just because it gave me the XP and the tools that I needed to beat the boss. But even like having just played that game once and so late in my life, I am already considering getting a tattoo of my favorite character.
And
that
would be
Robo. And like I have a whole section of my notes about why I connected so strongly with Robo.
I played the Super Nintendo version. I've played the game all the way through, probably about 3-4 times. And you have the one playthrough on Steam. So we are discussing some alternate versions of the same game.
And like opposite ends of the time scale too, because you played one of the very first versions. Yeah. And I played one of the most recent versions, possibly the most recent. So between us, we've got a pretty good idea of how the game has survived the translation to different platforms.
So our story begins at 1000 AD.
Not our 1000 AD. This is it takes place in a fantasy universe.
Okay. So we wake up as Chrono, the main character. There is a millennial festival going on in town.
Yep, and it's full of millennials. I mean, they're eating their avocado coasts and killing industries and receiving their plastic trophies and living it up.
So Chrono goes to this fair. He runs into this girl named Marl.
I pronounced her Marley.
Marley. Okay.
Yeah.
And they kind of sort of hit it off. But of course, kind of, sort of.
Well, not in my headcanon.
It's okay. I sort of have the Tenchi Muyo theory when it comes to Chrono and the how he relates to the women in the series. And I don't know if you're familiar with Tenchi Muyo, but it's basically
isn't that one of the harem animes?
yes.
Okay.
And basically, Tenchi is just this, guy. He's just there. And there are at least 3 different women that are just like completely obsessed with him. But they're 3 different kinds of women.
Right.
So in Chrono Trigger, you have the Princess Marl. You have the brainy
yeah, spoiler, she's a princess, by the way.
Okay. All right. Well, so you have...
We're going to spoil this whole thing, okay? That is your last spoiler warning. We are spoiling the entire thing.
So Marley's a princess, Lucca's basically a genius, and then Isla is this big, powerful woman.
Mm-hmm.
So you have these 3 very different kind of women who kind of all attach themselves in some way to Chrono.
Mm-hmm. I did not read any of the romantic subtext in that way. I could tell that was where the story was going.
Wanted to do.
And that is proven by the ending sequence where everybody gets married.
Wait, did you have the anime cutscenes in your version?
Yes.
Okay, I did not.
Oh.
I only
there were anime cutscenes in which
I only found out that those existed this morning.
Oh, wait.
And I watched them on YouTube, and I'm like, they did these cutscenes in the game, and they were fine in the game. And of course, Marley and Chrono did not get married at the end of the version.
They wanted to like sink the ship. Anyway,
they did.
Whatever.
With me. Congratulations.
Well, so we'll consider the anime cutscenes non-canon, which pleases me. Because I did not like those pairings. Mm-hmm. My pairings were totally different. Would you like to hear about them?
Yeah. Well,
I shipped Marley and Lucca. And from the beginning, I saw, as soon as those 3 characters were established, that Lucca had the hots for Marley and Chrono had the hots for Lucca. And that Chrono's whole motivation for going on this quest was Marley wanted to go on this quest, and Lucca was going to be with Marley, and Chrono was going to be with Lucca.
Gotcha.
Because and that all goes down to the one scene where they decide to try to save the world.
Yeah.
It starts with after going on a few quests, they end up in the extremely far future post-apocalyptic times. And then they find a computer and they read a record on the computer of when the world ended. And Marley doesn't want that to have happened. And I have huge philosophical problems with that concept because I believe very strongly all things come to an end. And that attempting to prolong your own life or the life of the things you love artificially will lead to greater heartbreak in the end. That is my philosophy. So when Marley started saying, no, we can't let this happen, I was like, no, Marley. And then I went, and if you watch the video of me playing, you'll see me going on this whole rant about how this is why we need to give children hamsters so that because hamsters live for a couple of years and that's long enough to get attached, but you can't stop them from dying. And then they learn how to accept death in a safe context where it's not, and they learn about mortality when it's not something that is super duper important to them. And I was like, instead of going on this massive quest to save the world, why don't we just go back in time to when Marley was a little kid and give her a hamster?
Well, since we're sort of on this bent, last night it just popped into my head. I looked up when Mr. Hooper died on Sesame Street, and then I watched it, and they had to explain to Big Bird,
Aww.
death, you don't come back from death.
Aww.
Now, my experience with death was my great-grandfather. He died when I was 5. And my dad, and one of the things that most of my family wishes he didn't do, but I'm glad he did, was he took me up, he showed me the body, he explained to me what it meant.
Yeah, I don't really have... That's the thing. Nobody in my life died until I was a teenager, and even that wasn't someone I really knew well. So yeah, I had to come to terms with death intellectually before I had to come to terms with death emotionally, which has, I think, made me into a different kind of person than I would otherwise.
Right.
Like, I read the Harry Potter series before I lost anyone that I cared about.
Wow.
And the Harry Potter series is, from the very beginning, the very first book until the very last book, every single major theme relates to accepting death, especially your own, but also deaths of people you love, because it's inevitable, and pursuing immortality only leads to everybody other than you getting hurt, and including yourself eventually. So yeah, I don't know, that really affected my interpretation of this story. But that's another thing I liked about it, was that even with that very different way of engaging with the story than was really intended, or that most people, especially children, would be engaging with, I still thought it was an extremely meaningful and effective story. And it meant that when I did save the world, reluctantly, reluctantly as it was, I didn't feel like, why am I even doing this? I was like, I'm doing this out of love for the people who aren't ready to accept their own or others' mortality yet. And that, is as powerful a lesson as any, I think.
Well, I feel like this is one of the things that has annoyed me about comic books. Death is basically a rotating door. Basically, every major comic book character that has ever existed has at least died and come back to life once.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the existential threat to the planet Earth in this story, and that is a creature called Lavos, who is an extremely powerful being from outer space. When I first saw him appear out of the ground, I saw it looks like a volcano with anime hair. But it turned out that this was also the meteor-like object which created what in that universe was sort of analog to the extinction of the dinosaurs. It fell to the Earth in prehistoric times, during a time when humans and dinosaurs were coexisting, but it's not Earth, so it's not inaccurate. Killed off the dinosaurs, and except for like a few who live underground, and also brought on an ice age. And for the rest of history, until the year 1999, just sort of lurked under the surface and built up its power, and in the year 1999 exploded out of the ground like a volcano and destroyed most life on Earth. And that's how we ended up with the post-apocalyptic future times, and that what's left of humanity is like lurking in these underground complexes, slowly starving to death because all of their food stores have been like destroyed. And there's this really heart-wrenching side quest where you're supposed to go into the underground storage unit where the foods are being kept, and you fight through all of these obstacles, and you defeat a boss, and then you find out that the stores are completely rotted, and all that's left is a single seed. And when I got to that point, I was like, oof, goddamn. There is like there's even less hope in this world than we thought. And that just sort of drives home the point of, this is no ordinary cataclysm. This doesn't just destroy life, it destroys hope.
And I think to go back to your whole thing about not necessarily being on board with changing the future, and how it's like, accept inevitability, I also feel like, yes, things end, but they don't necessarily have to end in complete hopeless catastrophe.
Yeah, and that's I think the point that I got to eventually was ultimately what drew me in was the love between the characters. And like I'm not even joking when I say, like, okay, Chrono is if I'm like inhabiting the character of Chrono as the player, Chrono is motivated by love for his friends, specifically Lucca. Even if they're not like romantically involved, they're definitely extremely close friends. She is of all the characters, she's the one who's known him the longest. Yes. He isn't necessarily in there for his own sake. And that's a theme that also gets repeated several times, is that it is your connections with others that make you strong and help you survive. And in fact, I wrote down a quote from Avenue Q. It's one of the most catchy songs from Avenue Q, which is, "When you help others, you can't help helping yourself." There's several sequences in the game where your generosity or your selflessness are paid back to you severalfold. Like, one example is a city in the present day that is, I don't know how it's pronounced, but I pronounced it Poor. Okay. It's Porre. The mayor of that city is extremely greedy, and he cares only about money. And he ends up at some point stealing a thing that you absolutely need to like get through the story. Although I suppose maybe if you're a really good player, you could get along without that object, but I needed it.
Well, the Moonstone becoming the Sunstone, at least in my view, is story essential.
Yeah. So he at one point steals this, and he won't give it back because he's a greedy bastard and he only cares about money. And in my playthrough, I had already done the thing that changes his mind, because I am a generous person, and it's showing generosity that does this. Because if you go back in time and do something very generous for the ancestor of that person, and specifically, it's like giving them some jerky. It's like I had accidentally acquired jerky because there was another quest that you need jerky to complete, and I thought, oh, I need jerky, I need to get that jerky, and then I found out later, no, the jerky you need for that quest is this jerky you get from this guy, not that guy. Yeah. So I had 2 jerkies and only needed 1, so I was like, all right. And then when this person says, ooh, I could really use some jerky or something like that, I was like, okay, you can have my jerky. And it says, oh, do you want to sell it to this character, or do you want to give it to this character? And I'm like, gold. I find gold on the ground. You can have it for free. So I was like, completely willing to give this person free jerky. And then they say, oh, I'm going to make sure everybody, all of my descendants, understand the importance of generosity. And I'm like, hey. And because I knew that I had already been to Poor in the present day, and I knew that the mayor was a stingy bastard, and also that it was destroying his family life, because his children were like, I hate my dad, and his wife was like, my husband only cares about money and it's destroying our family and all that, and so I was like, I wonder, and I went back to Poor, and I visited the mayor, and the kids are like, my daddy's my favorite person in the world, and his wife is like, I wish my husband were less generous, and like, so I had already done that by the time I got to the point where that guy steals the Moonstone and I need to get it back from him. So when I went to him, he already was generous, and he was like, oh, you need this? Go ahead, have it. That's a great example of how this story really enforces the importance of generosity. And not only that, but the longevity of the ripple effects of small actions. And that's something that, it being a time travel story, that really helps make those themes especially relevant, because you can go and see the effects and see that something that happens, something that you do, will have significant effects thousands of years in the future.
One of the major game mechanics is the fact that your decisions dictate the story. And we're talking something as small as giving somebody a piece of jerky. There are, in your version, 13 different endings. Basically everything before the cutscene.
Yeah.
There are 13 different ways that your story will end, and they're based on, some of them are based on your actions, some of them are based on how you face Lavos. Whether you crash the time travel plane, the Epoch, into Lavos, or if you face him through a portal that's left at Lucca's transporter.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's Chrono Dice. You can either get him back or you don't. Magus. You can either let him in the party or you don't.
I ended up having Magus in a party, and I also pronounce it Magus.
Okay.
But that's the thing. We will have different pronunciations of names. There's speaking of pronunciations, how do you pronounce the city where the fiends live in the present day? Medin. Medina. So you pronounce it Medina?
That's what I'm working with.
So I also pronounce it Medina. But there was this moment where I was like, as an Ohioan, I want to pronounce it Medina. Because there's a city in Ohio named Medina. But the city that Medina is named after is Medina. And it's a very important city in the history of Islam. So as a religious history buff, I want to pronounce it Medina. As an Ohioan, I want to pronounce it Medina. And I settled on Medina because I think it fits better with the fantasy setting. I ended up facing Lavos by jumping into the bucket at the end of time.
Okay.
That was how I did it, because it was, as far as I could tell, the most convenient way through. I could always just go back and repeat the battle, and I did repeat the battle many times.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't like using Epoch, which is the time ship. I knew that was possible, but it just seemed more clumsy to me. And I'm glad that I didn't, because apparently if you do that, you lose Epoch and you can't. The ending that I had involved like setting up a scenario where you might have to use Epoch to go on another journey.
Okay. Good news. If you crash the Epoch, the setup doesn't happen.
Yes, that's what I heard. So, yeah, I did do some reading on what the other endings are. Okay. And I'm happy with the ending I got.
Yeah, yours is pretty much considered the ending that you told me you got is pretty much considered the canon.
I also did the resurrecting Chrono thing, partly because I felt like without Chrono I couldn't get through the boss battle. He's a very powerful character, especially the I think it's called the Luminaire, the attack he has that is devastatingly powerful to every enemy.
Yeah, the Luminaire is probably the most powerful magic attack in the entire game. That is player character.
In fact, when I defeated Lavos, it was with Chrono, Lucca, and Robo. Robo is... And this actually goes back to why I really identify with Robo. Robo is extremely useful because he is extremely tough. He can take tons of damage. He starts out with more hit points than anybody else, as far as I know, except maybe Magus. And his attacks are very powerful. And he's a powerful healer. And that's like a triple threat in so many ways. It took me a while to figure out, because it took me a while to figure out that he could heal, because like you don't expect a tank to also be a healer. Mm-hmm. And he is almost literally a tank. But when I did realize that he's a healer, that strengthened my connection with him, because I have been describing myself as a self-healing tank for years, because I feel like I can take a lot of damage and survive. Right. And I also have the tools I need to recover from that damage. And I have been in situations where I was like basically putting myself in harm's way to protect my friends and being like, it's okay, I know I can take it. And I know I can recover from it. And the fact that Robo is a self-healing tank too is like just one more reason that I feel like him.
What I feel about this game is not only does the game story, the stuff that plays out, show that there is an intense bond between all of the characters, that they've come out of this as like a true family, but it also helps when you just with the characters in your party. Mm-hmm. And you know that Frog respects Chrono's skill with the sword. Yeah. And if you're playing with Frog and Chrono in a party for long enough, they develop these different sword techniques together. And if you have Lucca and Chrono, they basically, the longer that you have specific characters together in the same party, the more double and triple attacks they come up with.
Yeah.
I remember going up against Lavos with Chrono, Frog, and Lucca in the end of one of my playthroughs. That was because they were my core team. Anytime I could choose my three, those were my three. And it was because I spent so much time building them together that they became this like cohesive team.
I did not stick with one party for very long each time, mainly because I wanted to get to know each of the characters, and I didn't want to. The only character that I didn't really want to spend any more time with than necessary was Marley, because I didn't like her that much as a character, and I didn't find her especially powerful in battle.
Story speaking, she was there to be the girlfriend.
In my version of the story, she was there to be the princess who orders people around.
Yeah.
There is at least one quest where you have to have Marley with her so she can order people around, you know? But, like, especially, like, right after they decide to go on the big quest to save the world, they also they discover the end of time, which is the area where you can just go and consult with this guy who turns out to be the guru of time, I think.
Yeah.
And there's also a person there who can teach you magic, and there's a save point, and there's a heal point, and there's also the jumping off point to get to Lavos there. But as soon as I discovered the end of time, I just left Marley there. I was like, you stay there. And in my mind, I was like, imagining that I'm Chrono, I don't want to go on this quest. I am doing it because the princess wants me to, and I can't really get out of it because my best friend slash crush is all gung-ho for it. I said, okay, I'll go on this quest for you, as long as you stay out of my way. You just stay here. I'll take care of this. But I did have a couple of, like, character combos that I really liked. One of my favorites was actually Magus, Frog, and Robo. They're all extremely powerful hitters in terms of damage they can do. And Frog and Robo are both good healers as well. So the combination of, like, very powerful attackers and very powerful healers is just so effective. And that is the combo that I used for defeating the monster in the sunken desert. That once you do that, you can restore the forest, which is another important character point for Robo.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you did that, because you know you've been given so much love to Robo here. Like,
oh yeah, that was a huge part of it.
If you didn't do this, I was like, why not?
Because
is his thing.
Yeah, in the story there is a forest in the middle of one of the continents that vanishes at some point in history, between the Middle Ages and the present day, and it gets destroyed in war. And then there's this one character named Fiona, an NPC named Fiona, who tries and fails to replant the forest herself. And it turns out that there's a monster in the desert that is preventing the forest from being replanted. So, with Magus, Frog, and Robo, I defeated the monster, and that allows the forest to be replanted. But Fiona is just one person, and she's immortal, and she can't do it all herself. So Robo volunteers to spend 400 years replanting this forest, because he is just a fucking badass, and he's functionally immortal. And I was like, and that's another thing. One of my favorite things in the world is trees. This guy spent 400 years planting trees. And while he was doing so, he wasn't just doing that. He was also at the same time contemplating the nature of the universe and achieving something like enlightenment. And
well, you have 400 years. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, and that's something that, like, this guy is a robot, but he's also like a monk and a mystic and a healer and a nurturer, and he comes from such complex origins too. Like, he was created with the mission of, like, aiding in the destruction of humanity. Spoilers. But he encounters some humans who, like, specifically Lucca, who repairs him. And not only that, but gives him a choice for what to do with his life. And just, like, being given autonomy was enough to, like, start him on the path of self-discovery and, like, achieving this level of self-actualization. And freeing him from a family who were cruel and destructive, which I identify with that. I mean, like, I love my family, but they have a lot of problems that I've been spending most of my life trying to overcome. Which brings me to another of the themes that shows up a lot in this story, and that is the theme of bad moms. There are several bad moms in this story. And one of them is Robo's mom.
Mother Brain.
The Mother Brain, whose goal is the destruction of humanity and the furthering of the robot race.
Who in the hell does Mother Brain think is going to fix her if she breaks down? Especially since she's the one that's in control of all the other robots.
She is, well, that's the thing. She has exactly the same mental defect, I think, of a lot of bad abusive parents out there. And that is like the flaw of considering themselves perfect, being unwilling to accept their own weakness, and everybody who disagrees with them is wrong. They have learned not to depend on other people because they don't think they have to, which is like the opposite of the lesson being taught in this story, which is depend on other people, let them depend on you, and that is the only way you can survive in the long term.
That has been the one sort of plot hole I've always come across when it comes to like Skynet or these computers that gain sentience and like, we must wipe out humanity. Y'all gonna break down at some point. Like even the Matrix, y'all gonna break down at some point. Who's gonna fix you?
In that case, I think you should probably read questionable content because the AI in that series is powerful enough to be Skynet, but they like humanity.
Well, yeah,
most of them anyway, and the ones who don't are like the other robots keep them in line. Robo's story is actually like fundamentally connected with Lucca's in a way that like makes a whole lot of sense when you know Lucca's pain point, which is what happens with her mother, who is not a bad mother. She's not one of the bad moms.
She's like the one good mom.
Yeah. Well, there are two good moms.
Okay, Chrono's mom is kind of more of a, oh, hey, you're gonna go tourist time in space. Have fun.
Yeah. She realizes that her son is almost a man now and is in charge of his life. Unlike the king who is like, no, I want my daughter to be locked away in the castle forever. And she cannot have no choice in the matter.
And she will marry a boring prince. And they will have boring children.
So, do you want to spoil the story of what happens to Lucca's mom?
Lucca is, as we've established, she's a machinist. Mm-hmm. She is really into science and machinery, is followed in her father's footsteps as far as being an inventor is concerned. Unfortunately, she does this because when she was a child, her mother was crippled by one of her father's inventions. And Lucca didn't know how to shut the machine down.
So she was motivated after that point to learn all she could about machines so that she could in the future be able to control them if she needed to. And that's something that when the party first finds Robo, he is broken down and derelict in an abandoned building. And Lucca inspects him and sees, oh, I think I can repair him. And Marley is like, but aren't you afraid that he will attack us like the other robots have in this time period? And Lucas says, don't worry, I can make sure that he doesn't. Because she understands that machines don't kill because they're evil. They kill and they attack because humans programmed them that way. That goes back to her understanding of machines, that goes back to that very relevant experience of hers. She knows how destructively powerful machines can be, but she also understands that if you learn how they work and how to fix them and how to alter them, they will stop being a threat. And once I got those pieces of her character put together, I was like, oh shit, she is really smart and very wise. That this machine did something terrible to someone she loves, but she didn't blame the machine. She realized that the machine is just like an empty slate. And then the first thing she does when she encounters Robo is she neutralizes the threat that he poses and gives him the power to control himself. Because she asks him, well, what do you want to do after we're done with this? And he says, well, no one's ever asked me that. Because his whole life he has never been given autonomy. And she gave him that because she was able to because she understands machines so well. So if Robo's real mom, his creator mom, was an evil, controlling bitch. Lucca was like an adoptive foster mom who healed him. That makes their connection. And the fact that after returning from her solo side quest to either save or fail to save her mother, she comes back and the first person she talks to is Robo. And I think that is the perfect choice because he represents the fruition of her learning. And I don't think any other character would have been an appropriate choice for that scene.
And it works that way whether you succeed or fail. So you still have that sort of full circle closure, except this is who I felt. This is who I felt I failed. This is the thing I tried to warn Sai about.
And I also failed, by the way. I tried. I was so close to figuring out, and when I realized that time was running out, my mind went blank and I button mashed.
Yep.
I was like, I knew exactly what needed to be done, but I couldn't do it. That is how effective this story is, because like the way that scene is like aesthetically constructed, the music is so creepy and jarring. It's just like effective override. It's like the emotions you would have to be like extremely emotionally distant in order to really be able to like effectively work in that scene. So I don't blame myself for failing, because I realize how many elements of that scene were working against me.
Well, I mean, they only give you one shot at that. Was this? I feel this was all done by design. Mm-hmm. If you failed it gave you a perspective about Lucca might not have gotten otherwise. Yeah. And if you succeed, you still get that sort of insight of you were able to heal something. She blamed herself.
Yes, she did. She did blame herself, which is a terrible feeling for a child to have. And it's a false feeling, too.
It is also a testament to cinematic storytelling. And this is a 16-bit game made in 1994. This was before games had...
And, like, yeah, there's a limited, like, color palette and like, it's pixelated art and MIDI music, but it is a testament to the brilliance of the creative team that they were able to make the visuals so evocative and the music so emotionally effective. It's brilliant. That's also the moment when Robo gives Lucca a gift.
Yes.
As thanks for all that she has done for him. Because at this point, she has, like, repaired him twice, because, at least in my version of it, because there was the initial when they found him for the first time. Right. And then this was also right after he had spent 400 years planting a forest. And his remains, after he had, like, rusted and broken down from all of that work, his remains were put in a shrine dedicated to him and Fiona, who had, like, taken that burden upon themselves. And they show up at that shrine after the forest has been replanted, and they take his body, and Lucca repairs him again. And that's where this happens in the story. And while he had been planting this forest, he had taken sap from the trees and used his body to compress it into amber. To make a gift for Lucca, which ends up being an extremely powerful magical item, which revives her and gives her back like more than 200 hit points when she's died in battle or been knocked out in battle. Which is like, oh my god. I started using Lucca in every fight I could after that, because like even if like you use like the revive potion on someone after they've been knocked out, it only gives them like 50 hit points back, and they're going to be killed before the next round ends.
That's why you like Robo or Frog or like healers. Marley would have probably been a lot more useful if she were a better healer, but
yeah. Well, she's a princess. She's not supposed to have skills. So, let's talk a little bit more about bad moms. One of them is the time period of 1300 BC, I think, is the date, which is during the Ice Age. There are these floating rocks in the sky with cities on them, which was totally cribbed by Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, which has a city floating in the sky. Spoilers, comes crashing down at the end. And on these floating cities, there are these people who have discovered magic, and they call themselves the Enlightened Ones, and they feel superior to the Earthbound ones who have no magic, and there's this like extremely culturally relevant like lesson that more advanced societies consider themselves superior to primitive societies. A trope that is not exactly helped by the fact that Ayla, who is the primitive cavewoman character, is like treated as like intellectually inferior, even though she's clearly smart. She understands the way the world works. She just has trouble catching up to like understanding how technology works and stuff like that.
Plus, she barely speaks the language.
But there's like jokes like she says things like no use words I don't know, mind go boom or something like that. Something and it's like oh my god. But in this like slightly further along time period, the Enlightened Ones live in the sky and they spend their days in bed dreaming because that's how they achieve enlightenment. And the queen of this time period is, what's her name again? Queen Zeal, yes.
Basically, any royal person, the name of their kingdom is their name.
That's not egotistical at all.
So like Guardia is King Guardia.
Yeah.
Queen Zeal, yeah.
Okay, didn't make that connection before.
It's okay.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in.
There's a lot to take in.
So Queen Zeal has been accessing the power of Lavos, and it is corrupting her. And it's why she's so powerful, but it is also why she is becoming so evil. And this is also where we find out the origins of Magus, who was the bad guy in the medieval time period. We find out later that he was the child of Queen Zeal, who was still a child when her lust for power ended up destroying the kingdom of Zeal. And he saw the power of Lavos and decided to spend his life. He ended up, like, everybody who was present at that battle, or lots of the people who were present at that battle, got, like, magicked away to other time periods, and he ended up in the medieval time period. It's implied that he was raised by the Fiends, which are the little demonic characters and that are the main enemies in that. So he ended up being the antagonist in that time period to the humans. And when we discover him in the course of that battle, we find out that he has been trying to summon Lavos to try to defeat him, and he fails. Mainly because our heroes had to go and interrupt him. Although it's probable that he wouldn't have been able to.
He wasn't. Yeah. In the original timeline, he wasn't able to, obviously, because Lavos came back in 1999 to destroy it.
It could have just been that he wasn't powerful enough yet. But after we discover that he was from that time period, he joins the party, or there's the opportunity for him to join the party, and I took that opportunity because I was like, "Hey, powerful magic dude, come be with me." And he was very powerful compared to who I had at the time. So I was the other bad mother.
Because Marley's bad parent was her dad, and of course the chancellors never helped.
Yeah. If there's a chancellor in a medieval fantasy type story, never trust them.
Yeah.
There are no good chancellors that I can think of in any story.
We'll call that the Jafar effect.
Yeah. So we have like two characters who come from bad mothers. Robo ends up being ultimately becomes a caring, compassionate creature who is one of the most sympathetic characters, whereas Magus, and I think it might have been down to the age at which he lost his world, because he was still a very small child. The suffering that he went through, and also going through it mostly alone. He did have his deputies and his generals and stuff like that, but they were underlings. They were not friends. He remains a very dark and brooding character till the very end. He says cruel things to the other characters. even when he's on their side. And he says, after Chrono is brought back to life, he says, "Your death was due to weakness." I like him as a character, but not as a person.
He is functional.
Yes, he is extremely functional, and I think that his existence as a character is like excellent for the forwarding of the themes. He's also like when like they show the headshots of the characters next to their details, his face in his headshot is so sad. Yeah. I'm like, I remember like looking at him being like, he's like the saddest faced person in this whole story.
He's
but
very emo.
So there's another thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is cats. There's a lot of cats in this story, and they're like, cats in this story are a little bit like cats in real life. They're just there, and you can interact with them, but they don't like actively participate that much in life.
Kind of like dwarves.
Yeah. The tiny little child prince, whose name is Janus, in childhood, he has a cat. It's a lavender cat. Because everything has got to in the magic has got to be like special colors. But he has a cat who follows him around, and then after the destruction of the city, the cat ends up like living with the people who survived in the ground. And when Magus joins the party and is in that city, the cat recognizes him. He is a completely different person now. He's lived through like many years and devoted his life to this dark quest that has consumed him. But his cat still recognizes him and like follows him around and meows at him. And I just found that so evocative, and like his cat is humanizing him. It's like a reminder of where he came from. I am a cat person. Most of my pets throughout my life, even from childhood, have been cats. And I talked about this while I was playing and in fact I actually had a dream about a lavender cat that Janus's cat reminded me of. But like cats are my like favorite pet. There are dogs that I enjoy, but I'm definitely not a dog person. And my cat Tetra is like one of the most special creatures in the world to me. I appreciate media that recognizes cats, because cats get a bad rap. They're like considered less friendly and less loving than dogs, but I think they just love in a different way.
So I think the point that we're both trying to make is that our cats are far more attached to us than we sometimes give them credit for. You know, yes, there is that whole meme of, you know, the cat in Bruno's cat, is this sarcastic, you should just feed me and get over yourself.
Yeah, but Cat is one of Bruno's most stalwart companions.
Yeah.
Like, despite her like leaving for years on ends and leaving him in the hands of one of her more stable friends, the cat is always her cat. Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that like Janus's cat still remembers him even after he's become a totally different person with a totally different name, and no one else in his life recognized him when he came back. The cat still did. And like there's also like other cats in the story. There's like, it's early on, there's in the Millennial Fair, there's a child who has lost her cat, and finding that child's cat is one of the choices that you can that will affect the outcome of a future event. I tried to find the cat, but I couldn't. I found the cat, but I didn't know how to catch the cat, and like so that was one of the things that I failed to do.
I don't remember if I caught the cat. It's one of those little things that like it affects the story, but it doesn't necessarily.
It's one of the small things that in aggregate will affect the story. But I mean, I got through the trial. I was still sentenced to death, but I got an innocent verdict. Whatever.
Yeah, that was going to happen anyway.
Because
the chancellor wants you dead.
Yeah, exactly. But there's also Lucca has a cat. It's a robot cat. One of Lucca's inventions, which is on display in the fair, is a robot cat who fights and does karaoke.
Yes. Karaoke cat. My name is Gato, and I will fight you.
And like I ended up fighting that cat over and over and over again, trying to get enough silver points to get the to play the game to play the game over and over again to get the doppeldoll to get Chrono resurrected. And yeah, that was an interesting although tedious exercise. And there's also the cat, Chrono's cat, who at the very end, in the ending I got, in one of the possible endings, the cat runs away and jumps into a portal, and Chrono's mom chases the cat into the portal, and that sets up the if you end the story with and you still have Epoch, the time ship, you will have that opportunity to use the time ship again to go find Chrono's mom and the cat. So there are cats that are important to the story, although like cats in real life, they tend to lurk in the background, and your interactions with them are mostly down to your choices.
Frog was an interesting character from
Yeah, Frog is an anthropomorphic frog who used to be a human. You don't find named Glenn, and I kept forgetting that Frog was actually a human because I think it's like at one point Robo says my human friends and names Frog among them, and I'm like, oh yeah, Frog is a human. He's a frog. And like at one point where one of the enemies that you fight are like frogs. So I was like, how does Frog feel about defeating his cousins? And I was like, no, I forgot, he's a human. Frog was one of your favorite characters, so you want to describe him?
Well, the thing with Frog was that there's an ongoing theme of dedication and duty. He was bullied as a child, and Cyrus, who would go on to be like a legendary knight, was his friend that stood up for him and always encouraged Glenn to keep up with his sword training, to eventually go into the army, whatever else, And when Glenn kept refusing, there was a time where Cyrus would go on these adventures, and Glenn would be like, his sidekick, in an attempt to get the Masamune, this legendary sword.
I pronounced it Masamune.
So the legendary sword, Cyrus encounters Ozzy and Magus at the entrance of the cave. Defeat Cyrus. And then Magus is like to Glenn is, you're not worth killing. Boom, you're a frog. So all that's left for Frog is the hero medal, which is supposed to denote the person that is worthy of holding the Masamune, and the other half of the sword. And Frog takes this as a devastating defeat. He has failed his friend. And the events early on in the game when Marley and Chrono first come into 600 AD, Marley is confused with the Queen Lean. Well, Marley disappears, just like someone had interfered with history and done something to Queen Lean that would eliminate Marley from existence.
And it's strongly implied that because Marley was mistaken for her own ancestor, they called off the search for her.
The fact that Queen Lean was kidnapped is yet another sticking point for Frog, another failure point, because he promised Cyrus that he would do everything he could to protect the Queen. So Frog is dealing with this loss of honor. His arc is about realizing that he truly is worthy of the praise and the adulation and the love of his friends and others. He's able to start to love himself again. But there's always that bound to duty thing. He forms the bonds that he does with Chrono and Robo and everybody else based on the fact that he is now honor bound to them as he is to Queen Lean and Cyrus.
Finding out about Frog's backstory and some of the interactions with Cyrus really angered me, because there's this one point when he's been bullied by the children, Cyrus tells him that he's too weak or something like that. And I can understand that someone like Cyrus would think in those terms. But that's what we call toxic masculinity. Men aren't allowed to be victims. They're not allowed to be beaten. They're not allowed to be vulnerable. They're not allowed to be weak. And Frog has internalized that. Any show of weakness he views as a personal failing. I think he's ultimately a very tender-hearted character. He's He is, again, he is the second most powerful healer after Robo. He's deeply passionate. He considers himself an inferior fighter, and that drives him to try harder, which ultimately makes him a more powerful fighter. But he still retains that fear of failure and that, like, lack of self-respect. And I think that that's his greatest tragedy, honestly.
There's a lot of parallels between Frog and Wolverine, or at least as I have seen Wolverine in the years. There is this sort of internal failing, this sense of internal failing.
Yeah.
For Wolverine, I have this berserker rage, I have this PTSD, I have all of these things that makes me lesser and not worthy, so I fight my pain away. And I, focus on sort of, I guess, this sort of warrior lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And in a way, I feel like that's what Frog has done, is he's internalized all this internal failure and focused that on being the hero that everybody thinks he is. And what he doesn't realize is he is the hero that everyone thinks he is.
Because it's not about like, it's not an identity thing, it's an action thing.
Yeah.
It is about what you do, and he has done great things.
And so, like, in various X-Men media, Wolverine will go off alone and figure himself out, and every time he learns the same lesson of, you aren't the monster you think you are. You are a hero. You are a good person. You don't have to segregate yourself off from society. And I feel that Frog, hopefully, through this experience, doesn't isolate himself as much as he did before this happened.
Yeah, I hope so. He was already set up for those kinds of feelings, but having been turned into a frog really enforces that, because other people see him as other now. They see him as different and even disgusting creature. Lucca, when she first encounters him, is like, ooh, but I hate frogs. Mm-hmm. And it's like, and when she said that, I was like, God damn it, Lucca, stop being so racist. Because she loves machines, but she doesn't like frogs. And like other people, when they describe him, they talk about this monstrous frog creature. And I'm like, he's a human being. He's a person. Like, I really feel for him.
Now, another thing I really found cool about Frog is he has one of his special attacks is a giant frog bounces down from the sky and just like bounces on the enemies. I don't remember what it's called, but it's like this rainbow glittery frog.
I never saw that.
Really? Wow.
Here's the thing. I did not prioritize experimenting with all of the special attacks that they could do. Okay. Mainly because while I am in battle mode, I have a lot of trouble with complex strategizing. So I will learn a few attacks, and I will use them to great effect. And I did very few combos, which might be why I didn't find it especially rewarding to stick with one party lineup for the majority of the story, because combos themselves were not something that really that were very useful for me, just because of the way I think. I wanted it to be simple, and that meant like learn a few of each character's attacks and special abilities, and learn how to use them to the greatest effect that I could. And that's just how I operate. I prefer to keep things relatively simple when I'm under pressure. So I did not learn everybody's special abilities.
With me, it's like when somebody got a new ability or something new came up, I'm like, okay, let me see how this works. Mm-hmm. And usually it would be something that was more powerful than what I was already using. Yeah, my core was Frog, Lucca, and Chrono, but I played enough as other characters to develop teams with those. And especially on my subsequent playthroughs, I realized that if I focused my energy primarily on building one team, it will take me less time to build myself up enough to be able to fight Lavos. In theory.
Do you want to get into the bad tropes?
Yes, let's get into the problematic, because that was the first thing you said when you walked in here today, is there was, this is good, but there was some problems.
There were a few. There were a few problems. one of them was the idea of the identical ancestor, because like that is a trope that shows up in a lot of time travel stories.
Well, it saves on casting.
It saves on casting, and it also enables you to like slot yourself into the past, like be like, oh, I look identical to this person because we. But like, here's the thing: I know identical twins in real life, and they look different because, especially if they're adults, because your life experiences shape your physical appearance. The idea that Marley would just look identical to Lean to the point where Lean's own husband wouldn't notice the difference other than in their behavior. Like, it's totally unrealistic. Because, like, they're not even twins. They're, like, Lean's genetics would be diluted by several generations. So that's something that whenever I see it in time travel stories, I just roll my eyes so hard that they roll behind the fridge and I have to go and get them. But
one of the more egregious examples, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, there is a time travel element. April O'Neil gets sent back to feudal Japan. So the Turtles have to go back in time to save her.
Yeah.
While April is in feudal Japan, she meets someone that looks almost exactly like Casey Jones.
Okay.
Which is I don't know how familiar you are with Ninja Turtle. Casey Jones.
A little bit.
Casey Jones is sort of their brother in arms. She sees this guy in the past and just assumes that he's Casey Jones' ancestor. But fortunately, the movie never really says that he is or isn't. But as soon as she recognizes this guy that looks like Casey, she sees a rat crawling across the floor, and she says, yeah, you look familiar too. And they dissolve from the rat to Splinter in the present. Splinter is their...
I know who Splinter is.
Okay. Like I said, I'm not sure how familiar
I am familiar enough. My knowledge of Ninja Turtles is mostly from way, way, way back when I was a little child, because they were amongst my favorite toys when I was a little kid.
Okay.
So I know I know it in broad strokes.
Okay, so you had like the original toy line.
I don't know if it was the original toy line, but I did have the toys. Another trope that is a video game trope in particular, and that is having to fight almost everything you find.
Yeah.
And just like wild animals you encounter in the wilderness will immediately attack you, and they will not stop until you kill them. And that's a video. It's almost all video games. Until recently, people have started to move away from that. But to me, I find this a dangerous trope philosophically. And I don't know if anyone's actually learning that particular lesson about how the world works from video games. But in real life, it is in nobody's best interest to just attack people randomly or other animals randomly. Right. If you know anything about wild animals, you know that they do not attack unless they feel threatened or they need food. And if you just walk through the wilderness and don't hurt anybody, you will probably be fine. It's only when you happen to threaten another creature that they will attack you, and chances are they'll probably just run away. And the reason I really found it jarring in this game in particular is because of the themes in the story of forging connections with people who are different from you, and almost all of the antagonists end up having some sympathetic motivation. I just found it jarring that it also contained that trope, although I forgive it because again, that's basically all video games, especially in that time.
We are recording this about a week and a half, 2 weeks past yet another shooting that got blamed on video games.
And I'm when I heard that Trump was talking about video games being an element in motivating these shootings, I was like, oh my god, you just undermined your base in such a big way.
Oh yeah.
Gamers are holding up the conservative party, right? Or conservative politicians these days.
It is hard to want to play video games in an environment where these are, and this is for me personally, it's hard for me to get I will latch onto a game and that will be all I play. I don't play online with anybody. It's I mentioned Gamergate hashtag a while back, basically in jest of during the 2016 election, just as Hillary had clinched the nomination. Mm-hmm. And there was still all these Bernie bros. We'll never support Hillary. And we'll vote Trump before we vote for Hillary. So I tweeted, hashtag Bernie bros are the new hashtag Gamergate. And boy, howdy, did I get it from the Gamergate people.
Oh, did you also get it from the Bernie
No,
bros?
I didn't have time to get anything from the Bernie bros. Gamergate had pretty much gone dormant by this point.
Yeah, although it had the same mentality has resurfaced with things like Comicsgate and
because how dare Miss Marvel have a successful series
and also like everything related to like Star Wars or superhero movies.
How dare Rey have a lightsaber and be a Jedi? How dare Captain Marvel? How dare female Ghostbusters?
Speaking of sexism in video games, so there is some sex and gender related stuff. When one of the tropes is sexually powerful women being always evil and corrupt, except for Ayla, who is primitive, and that gives her a pass. We have several sexually powerful women who like show cleavage, and they and like the first ones that show up for me were the half-naked snake ladies in the medieval times who are monsters.
The ones in the church.
Yes. Okay. There's also the character Flea, who is I think a trans woman or something very similar to.
The recaps that I watched this morning refer to Flea as a cross-dressing male.
Yeah.
So trans woman is probably more accurate.
Yeah. And that's a trope in Japanese media as well. Yeah. That's where we get the word trap.
Yeah, thank you, anime.
But, so Flea is one of Magis's deputies. Mm-hmm. She is extremely sexually provocative. Mm-hmm. She says, I actually screen capped one of her dialogue lines. She says, man or woman, it's all the same. Power is beauty, and I'm deliciously strong. And she does that while blowing a little kiss.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, and like she's so that gives you an idea of what kind of character she is. Mm-hmm. And that's trans representation for you.
Yeah, thanks, Japan. Sorry, I didn't mean to denigrate the entire country of Japan.
Yeah, and like
maybe I kind of did. I don't know.
And like, to be fair, Western culture does it too.
Yes,
they just don't.
They don't do it quite this way. This is indicative of Japanese, I don't want to call it appropriation of American culture, but more of a mistranslation. Because, for instance, hair metal. Hair metal lives in Japan.
I want to see that.
There is even a genre of Japanese metal that is known as visual kei.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that.
Okay, which is basically like hyper hair metal. Promoted as boy bands. Just to give you an idea, there is no subtlety like we're more used to on this side of the ocean.
So apart from that, and moving away from the other gender related stuff,
right.
The fact that in the scene where Lucca attempts to save her mom, you get to read a page of child Lucca's diary where she says that girls don't need to know science. And, like, she's not interested in science or machines until this critical point. And before that, she doesn't think of it as for girls. And that's a real stereotype that has kept a lot of girls from studying science and engineering. And we are still, to this day, trying to rectify that. So that's not a good thing. But I do appreciate that Lucca did, move past that way of thinking, even if it took a tragedy for it to happen.
And the idea that women don't like or don't go into STEM fields, it's utterly not true. First of all, my stepsister is an accountant. She loves math.
Accounting is her life. Accounting is actually a female-dominated field right now.
That I wasn't aware of.
Part of that is because it is a supportive industry where a lot of accountants are like secretary plus, So that's but also like the original calculators were women. The people before calculators were invented, it was women's job mostly to do the math that people needed to get done. And also the first computer programmer was a woman, Ada Lovelace. There were women programmers who put Neil Armstrong on the moon, you know? And also, like, there's also the trope, Lucca also falls into the very common trope of, if there's a woman who is interested in a male-dominated field of study, it is usually a male family member who got her into it. In her case, her father, who is also an inventor and an engineer.
And I think the obvious one of the girl that takes up the boy hobby is not the girl the guy goes for. The friend in the wing. And this is, of course, going back to my sort of Tenchi Muyo theory of how Chrono is basically surrounded by these women that all have a bond and an interest in him, and poor Chrono can't decide. And this is a Japanese male fantasy. This is a male fantasy pretty much everywhere. But again, because I mentioned Tenchi Muyo, because this is a trope that happens a lot in Japanese.
The other female character who is very gender nonconforming is Ayla, the primitive, super strong fighter type. And she's also a healer, I keep forgetting, because she has an ability that can heal others with a kiss. Oh my god. But she's not as powerful a healer as Robo or Frog. She doesn't use weapons. She uses her fists. She comes from a culture that values physical strength over almost anything else. The chief is whoever is strongest in the Yoka tribe, which one of the people in that tribe goes out of his way to say, it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman, the chief is the one with the biggest muscles. And I'm like, okay, but if it really didn't matter if it was man or woman, you wouldn't have to say that it doesn't matter if they're a man or woman. So Ayla's the chief because she's the strongest, and she is attracted to other people who are strong.
That's Chrono.
That's Chrono. Yeah, she compliments all the characters on their strength, including Lucca and Robo. She is confused about what Robo even is, but she recognizes strength when she sees it, and Robo is very strong, so she likes him too. But the fact that in order to have like a very strong, very sexually powerful character who is good, you have to have her be like absurdly primitive, and that really got to me. Is like, she exists before the concept of like proper ladyhood exists, which, yeah, I don't know, I have my own problems with that. But I also need to get into the fact that like there is a character in one of my favorite series named Ayla, who is also from prehistoric times, and that is the Earth's Children series, which I have put on my list of things to possibly have episodes about. Right. Although it's a very long book series, so it would be a chore to read, even if you were interested in it.
Yeah, it would have to be like a book at a time, sort of thing.
Yeah. But Ayla is, in the Earth's Children series, she's the main character. She is extremely strong, because she has had to be strong to survive the things that she encounters in the story. She is extremely intelligent, and she is very sexually beautiful, and she's blonde-haired. So the except for the intelligence, she's but even Ayla in the book series has like a speech pattern that leads people to think that she's not as intelligent as she really is, because she was a Cro-Magnon person, which is like a modern human, but she was raised by Neanderthals, and Neanderthals do not have our speech abilities. It's been speculated that they used to communicate with sign language, emphasized with like grunts and very basic words, and that's how it is in this series. So she was raised by them, and she speaks like they speak, which is not as well. So there's that other, like, so Ayla in Chrono Trigger has like this very like basic stilted speech. So that's another interesting similarity between the two characters. When I saw that this powerful, primitive, beautiful woman when I saw that her name was Ayla, I burst into laughter, and I was like, oh. And then I was like, I have to tell Daria about this. And then I was immediately trying to figure out, okay, how can I construct a rationale for making this be the same Ayla?
So yeah, the characters that you were really excited about, because you let me know immediately, was Robo and Isla, and you never shied away from your disdain of Magus.
No, well, I do find him interesting, but yeah, he's an asshole, and he remains an asshole until the very end. But I understand why he's an asshole. Speaking of like gender, though, there's the character of Kino, who is from Ayla's time period, and they are very close friends, and they actually end up together. I thought when I first saw Kino that she was a girl. I don't know, just something about like the way her character's designed, and she has a ponytail at the top of her head, and like, but it turns out that Kano is supposed to be a boy, and it was supposed to be like this ironic, like, big strong girls, smaller, less strong boy relationship that defies the gender expectations. But
It's a trope in and of itself.
Yeah, it's a trope in and of itself, especially in anime. But like, I thought she was a girl until the very end. I still think she's a girl, and I'm just gonna say she's trans. That's all. Like, that's my headcanon. And yeah, they still end up together because they're gay, obviously.
That was another thing that was confirmed by the anime cutscenes that I didn't have. I think in the ending, before it goes to the cutscene where the epoch is flying through everywhere, I think that Isla is on dactyls with Kino.
Yeah.
It's not as silly as the animated Isla forces him to put a ring on her finger. Now we are now married.
But like, yeah, I mean, I could see it because like they clearly have like this really strong bond, and Kino really admires her, and I'm cool with them being together. I'm not cool with Kino being a boy though.
Yeah, oh well. It's a JRPG.
Yeah.
Gender is
weird. There's another trope that I wanted to mention that bothers me for political reasons.
Okay.
And that is, like, repeatedly throughout the story, we end up having authority figures who are corrupt and oppressive in some way. And sometimes it's a legitimate authority figure, and sometimes it is not. The Chancellor is an illegitimate authority figure. Not only is he like not even the king, but he's also both times there is a corrupt Chancellor. It turns out that he was like being impersonated. But when it's a legitimate authority figure, usually a royal person who is corrupt, it is almost always some outside corrupting influence. Like in the case of Queen Zeal, she is being corrupted by Lavos, and in King Guardia is like too strict with his daughter, in part because he has like this well-intentioned want to protect her. I don't know. It's and there's like a couple of other examples of like legitimate authority being corrupt, and in the story it's always you get rid of the source of the corruption, and then the authority is restored, and everything is good. But I disagree with that, because I don't think that the corruption of authority figures is a temporary problem that can be resolved. I think corruption is the natural result of power. And I think that not admitting that results in people putting too much faith in the legitimacy of leaders. But that is a trope that exists in a lot of stories.
I think that we feel the psychological need to believe that those we place in positions of power have our best interests in mind, which is, of course, not true most of the time. But we make ourselves believe it anyway, because I don't know, maybe we don't think society would work otherwise.
My theory is that this trope is so common in media, especially like mainstream media, because the more power you have in your society, the more influence you can have over your society's media and culture. And it is in your best interest to perpetuate ideas that your authority is legitimate and good. And that is like blatant and overt in a lot of cases. Like superhero movies get subsidies from the military.
Oh, yeah.
in exchange for putting pro-military elements in the story that wouldn't necessarily be there otherwise.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a thing. So, what else do we want to talk about?
This is a game you should play, even if it is the Steam version with the anime cutscenes that are completely unnecessary and somehow force Marley and Chrono to marry for some reason.
Yeah, well,
maybe.
in my headcanon, maybe Lucca is the one who married Marley, and so now she's a princess who also is a technological genius, like Shuri from Black Panther.
And of course, that means Marley's getting all the attention because she's the one in the kick-ass suit.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this. It was spectacular. I highly recommend it. And yeah, JRPGs are not my genre, but like this story was worth it to me.
I would actually fall out of doing out of JRPGs following this because of my tendency to get several hours into a game and get lost and not know how to get out. And you know what? Screw it. I don't even like this game that much to begin with. So it's like Chrono Trigger is like the one RPG that I really love.
Everything about it just leads you into caring more about the story and the characters. I would be astonished if you get all the way through this game and not cry at the end.
Certainly, you should certainly feel something. You know, even if it's a sense of accomplishment or something else. I mean, you were taken on this journey with these characters. Chrono is as good a self-insert character as you're going to get in the sense that there really isn't much to Chrono.
Yep.
Hero,
he is
bad guy.
Spiky-haired anime good guy is what he is.
So basically, he's you. And you can infuse him with any of you know...
Well, like, even though I had, like, fundamental disagreements with, like, the concept of trying so hard to change the future, like, I was able to justify it in terms of, like, what Chrono's motivations might be if he had that same motivation. Because he is very much a blank slate.
And I think that's what makes it so much easier for you to connect really sucked into the story, because so many RPGs now, the character, your main character, the character you basically play, it's not a blank slate anymore. Yeah. It's not, it's not a self-insert. It's somebody with their own backstory and all this stuff. And I feel that, it may make for a better story. But you're playing a video game. Part of playing the video game is being able to immerse yourself into that role.
There's one more symbol that I wanted to talk about, because there's like a lot of meaningful symbolism in this story. Like almost everybody has a meaningful name. There's like symbolism that's drawn from mythology and from like culture, and one of the symbols that gets repeated in a lot of different quests and in lots of different time periods is the symbolism of planting seeds. We already talked about Robo and his 400 years of planting forest, but there's also like the seed that we find in amongst the rotted food stores in the post-apocalyptic future. We bring that seed up and we give it to the people who live there, and they plant it, and it gives them hope. So we have seeds as a symbol of hope. And there's a sapling that survived the falling of the cities in the sky during 1300 BC. That even though it's like Ice Age wasteland, they plant the sapling and it gives and I think like the option are throw it away because there's no hope for it here, or plant it with hope. So we have, again, seeds and plants are a symbol of hope. So there's like this recurring theme of planting seeds and planting trees, and it reminded me of a saying. I forgot who said it, but I have a quote. I have it like framed in on my wall somewhere. The meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. And that's one of my life mottos, and that's something that really fits with the themes of this story, because it's all about the ripple effects of your actions and those effects surviving you and affecting the world for centuries and millennia to come. And seeds are like a very, very powerful symbol of that. And it's just another example of how very well written this story is.
Yeah, there was a lot of time and effort and care
Mm-hmm.
that was put into this.
And it has served as an example of its own themes, because it is still beloved after decades, and it will probably still be very beloved for decades and possibly centuries to come. Instant classic is what we call it. So, shall we wrap up? Any final statements?
Play Chrono Trigger.
Yep. Play it.
Even if it's the Steam version with the controls that are abysmal and the cutscenes that are completely unnecessary.
Yeah, you don't have to pay attention to the cutscenes. Some of them are all right. They got.
I mean, it's good animation.
Yeah. If you do play the Steam version, do yourself a favor. Write down what each key is and keep it with you. And also, like, keep a pad of paper with you for jot, regardless of what version you play. Keep a pad of paper with you to write down clues, because you will need them. Just keep in mind, it will mess with your emotions. You will get invested. It's extremely emotionally effective.
All of your decisions matter.
On that note, this has been False Dichotomies. I'm Cy Castells.
I'm Daria Quinn, and thank you for spending your time with us.